The wind carried dust and silence through the dry canyons that surrounded Silver Creek, a lonely stretch of land where even echoes seemed to fade before they reached the mountains. The sun had begun to dip behind the red cliffs, throwing long shadows across the land. Near the water's edge stood a woman, Eleanor Hayes, 30 years old, her blue dress torn by thorns and dust-streaked from travel. She had once been the kind of woman people in town turned their heads for, steady eyes, proud stance, and a voice soft but sure. But now those eyes were wet, trembling with tears that refused to fall until they burned her cheeks. Across the river, a tall figure walked away. Barefoot, shoulders broad and marked with faint scars of battle, his long black hair brushed his back as the evening wind caught it. His name was Tawa, an Apache scout who had once saved her life, and then stolen her heart without saying a word. Eleanor called after him, her voice cracking through the heavy quiet. "Tawa, don't do this, please." He didn't stop. The water rippled around his legs as he stepped further away, his shadow shrinking against the fading light. Her knees gave way. She fell to the dirt, the cool mud of the riverbank clinging to her palms. "You can't leave me now," she whispered. "Not when everything's gone." But he didn't look back. The sound of his steps on the stones faded, replaced by the hiss of the river and the cry of a hawk circling overhead. Only a week ago, they had ridden together through the canyon trails, hiding from bounty men and soldiers alike. She had met Tawa after the raid on Fort Clements, where her wagon was ambushed and her husband killed. She was left for dead until Tawa found her among the wreckage, bloodied, terrified, and alone. He'd carried her to safety, tended her wounds in a hidden valley, and taught her how to survive off the land. But over time, survival had turned to something deeper, something neither of them could name aloud. And now, when she needed him most, he was walking away. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve and forced herself to stand. Her boots sank slightly into the wet earth as she crossed to the river's edge. The sky above her was painted with orange and violet, the first star flickering faintly through the haze. "Why, Tawa?" she murmured, staring at the fading silhouette. "Why are you leaving when I can't even find my way out of this?" He had said little that morning when the trouble started, just that white men are coming. He had seen smoke from the ridge. Soldiers, maybe bounty hunters, maybe worse. He told her to go back to town. She refused. She said she'd rather die than return to those who had turned their backs on her after her husband's death. That was when his eyes changed. Something deep and distant crossed his face, like the shadow of a storm cloud. "Then I go," he said quietly. "If I stay, they kill you because of me." And just like that, he turned away. Now, as darkness swallowed the canyon, Eleanor pressed a trembling hand against her chest. Beneath her fingers, her heart hammered like a desperate horse trying to break free from a corral. "I don't care what they do to me," she said into the wind. "I only cared when you were here." Her words vanished into the emptiness. From far away, thunder rolled across the horizon, not from a storm, but from hooves. She could hear riders. Her stomach twisted. He had been right, someone was coming. But it was too late to hide, and too late to run. Eleanor took one last look at the place where he disappeared beyond the ridge. Her tears dried in the wind, leaving dust trails on her cheeks. She reached for the small knife he had given her, the one with a turquoise stone in the handle, and clenched it tight. "If I die," she whispered, "I'll die remembering him." The river shivered under the fading light as the rider's thunder grew louder. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and on the far ridge, unseen to her, Tawa had stopped. His dark eyes turned back toward the river, his jaw set, his hand tightening on the bow at his side. He could still hear her crying, but he didn't move, not yet. The thunder of hooves grew louder until the ground beneath Eleanor's boots trembled. Dust swirled through the air, burning her eyes. She ducked behind a cluster of dry brush, clutching the knife Tawa had given her. Her breath came fast and shallow. Across the wide plain, silhouettes emerged, 5 men on horseback, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. They carried rifles slung across their backs, dust coats flapping in the wind. The leader, a tall man with a scar slicing across his cheek, pulled his horse to a halt near the riverbank. "There's her trail," he barked. "The widow's not far." Eleanor froze. Widow. That word cut deep. It wasn't just her husband's death they meant, it was everything she'd lost since. Her home, her land, her dignity. After the raid on Fort Clements, the townsfolk had whispered that she'd betrayed her husband by surviving. Some even said she'd run off with an Apache. Now, those rumors had become a noose tightening around her neck. She pressed lower to the ground as one of the riders dismounted and bent over the mud. He pointed at the faint footprint near the river. "Fresh, she's close." The scarred man nodded. "We'll find her. The colonel wants her alive. Says she knows where that Apache's hiding." Eleanor's heart thudded painfully. Thereafter TAWA. Up on the ridge, unseen through the haze, Tawa crouched among the rocks. His sharp eyes followed every movement below. The wind tugged at his hair, carrying the smell of gunpowder and sweat. He could see her, the flash of blue from her dress beneath the brush. She was trembling, terrified. He clenched his jaw. He had promised himself he wouldn't go back. The white men hunted him for the killing of 2 soldiers, killings he hadn't meant but couldn't take back. If they caught him near Eleanor, they would hang her beside him. That was why he'd walked away, to save her from his shadow. But now, seeing those riders circle the place where she hid, the promise burned like a brand inside him. Eleanor could hear their voices closing in, spread out. She can't be far. Her fingers tightened on the knife's hilt. The turquoise stone glimmered faintly in the dying light. Tawa had said it was a protection charm. Right now, it was the only thing keeping her courage from shattering. She pressed her palm into the dirt, steadying herself, and whispered, "If you can hear me, Tawa, forgive me." A twig snapped behind her. Before she could turn, a gloved hand yanked her to her feet. She gasped, slashing out with the knife, cutting the man's sleeve. He cursed and backhanded her hard enough to send her sprawling into the mud. The world blurred, found her. The man shouted. The others rode over, laughter in their voices. "Well, well," the scarred leader sneered, dismounting. The lady of Fort Clements herself. "You're a hard woman to find." Eleanor struggled to her knees, hair falling across her face. "I've got nothing you want." "Oh, I think you do," he said, gripping her chin roughly. "That Apache, you were seen with him. Where is he?" She spat at his boots. "Gone, like everything else." He chuckled, low and cruel. "Then I reckon we'll start with teaching you some manners." He raised his hand, and the air cracked with a sharp whistle. An arrow split the wind, burying itself in the dirt between them. The men froze. Another arrow struck, this one grazing a horse's leg. The animal reared, screaming. Chaos erupted. "Where is he?" Someone yelled. Eleanor's eyes darted to the ridge. Through the swirling dust, she saw him, Tawa, silhouetted against the fading sun, bow drawn, eyes fierce and unblinking. The scarred man shouted, "Shoot him!" Gunfire exploded. Bullets tore through the air. Tawa leapt from the ridge, rolling behind a fallen log as lids split the dust around him. Eleanor dropped flat as the battle erupted around her. Gunshots, screams, the wild thunder of hooves. "Tawa!" She screamed. He didn't answer, but she saw him rise again, calm, focused, like a shadow made of fire and will. Every arrow he loosed struck true. One by one, the riders fell. The last man turned to flee, his horse disappearing into the twilight. Silence followed. Only the river moved. Eleanor's body trembled. She pushed herself up slowly, eyes darting toward the ridge where smoke still drifted. "Tawa?" He stepped out from behind the log, chest heaving, blood streaking his arm. His face was unreadable as he looked at her, half sorrow, half relief. "You should have gone," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "And leave you to die?" He looked at her a long time, then turned his gaze toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "They will send more," he murmured. "They always do." She took a step toward him. "Then we run." For the first time that night, his eyes softened. "Run where, Eleanor?" Her voice trembled. "Anywhere you are." He said nothing. The wind sighed through the canyon, and somewhere in that wind, between fear and longing, the promise of a deeper story began to take shape. Night fell heavy and fast over Silver Creek. The gunfire had stopped, but the echo of it still hung in Eleanor's chest like thunder that refused to fade. The bodies of the riders lay scattered near the riverbank, their blood turning the dirt dark and sticky. Smoke from Tawa's arrows drifted upward, curling into the pale light of the rising moon. Eleanor stood silent, her breath trembling. She had never seen death this close, not like this. Not at Tawa's hands. He wiped the blood from his arm and looked at her, eyes sharp but tired. "We must go," he said simply. She hesitated. "Where?" "North," he replied, glancing toward the mountains that loomed like black teeth against the sky. "There is a trail through the rocks. No soldiers there." Her voice cracked. "You're hurt." Tawa's jaw tightened. "It is nothing. If we stay, more will come." She nodded slowly. There was no time to argue. The moonlight caught in her hair as she knelt and picked up the knife she had dropped. It felt heavier now. Everything did. They moved through the night, shadows against shadows. The ground was rough and dry, littered with sagebrush and stones that bit at Eleanor's boots. She stumbled once, and Tawa caught her by the arm. "Careful," he murmured. His touch sent a rush through her, warm and painful, like the memory of something she couldn't keep. "I'm fine," she whispered. But her voice shook. After a while, they stopped near a dry ravine. Tawa crouched, checking the ground for tracks. "They will ride again by morning," he said quietly. "We must rest before then." Eleanor sank against a boulder, exhaustion heavy in her bones. She watched him gather brush and flint, his movements silent and sure. When the fire finally flickered to life, the light painted his face in gold and shadow. Scars crossed his chest, old ones, healed but never forgotten. She found herself staring. "How many battles have you fought?" He didn't look up. "Too many to count, and yet you saved me." Tawa paused, then met her eyes. "Saving you was not battle. It was choice." The words hit her harder than the cold. For a moment, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them, and the smell of burning sage hung in the air. Later, when the fire had burned low, Eleanor broke the silence. "Those men said the colonel wanted me alive." "Why?" Tawa's expression darkened. "Because they believe you know me." "I do," she said softly, "and I'm not ashamed of it." He looked into the flames. "They will not see it that way. To them, I am only a name in a report, an enemy, a thing to hunt." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "Then let them hunt me too." Tawa turned sharply. "No. Why not? You said we have nowhere to go." He hesitated, his voice low. "Because if you fall with me, I have no peace." She reached across the fire, her hand trembling slightly. "Tawa, I've already lost everything. The only peace I've felt in months is when you're near." For the first time, his expression cracked, just a flicker of pain behind his eyes. He stood and turned away, staring out into the darkness beyond the FIRELIGT in the distance. Lightning flashed behind the mountains. "They will not stop," he said. "They never do. My people are scattered. Yours call me killer. There is no place for us. Eleanor rose, moving closer. Then we'll make one. He looked back at her. The firelight danced between them, turning her tear-streaked face into something fierce and determined. You do not understand, he said, voice strained. To walk with me is to walk into war. She didn't flinch. Then I'll walk beside you. For a heartbeat, everything was still: the night, the wind, even their breath. Then he looked down, exhaled slowly, and nodded once. Tomorrow we cross the fire trail, he said. After that, there is no turning back. By dawn, the fire was out, and the cold crept through the canyon. Tawa stood on the ridge, scanning the horizon. Eleanor packed what little they had: some dried venison, water from the creek, the turquoise-handled knife. The first light of morning painted the desert in gold and crimson. Tawa looked toward the mountains. That is the fire trail, he said. Once we cross, the land belongs to no one. Eleanor met his gaze. Then that's where I want to be. He gave a single nod, silent but resolute. Together. They stepped forward into the wild unknown, two souls running not from danger, but toward whatever fate the desert still held for them. The desert stretched before them like an endless sea of fire and stone. The rising sun burned across the canyon walls, turning them the color of blood and rust. Eleanor shielded her eyes as the wind carried fine dust through the air. Every breath tasted of heat and silence. Tawa walked a few paces ahead, boughs slung over his shoulder, his long black hair moving with the breeze. His bare chest glistened faintly under the sun, the scars on his skin telling stories she dared not ask about. He moved like part of the land itself, silent, certain, unbroken. Eleanor stumbled over a rock and caught herself with a gasp. How much farther? Tawa didn't turn. Until the sun sleeps. She exhaled shakily. You mean all day? Yes, he said simply. If we stop, the heat kills. The soldiers ride with water. We do not. Eleanor pressed her lips together. Every step hurt, her legs aching from the night's journey. But she said nothing more. The desert did not care for weakness, and she didn't want him to see her break again. By midday, the ground shimmered like glass. They stopped only long enough to share a small sip of water from Tawa's canteen. Her throat was raw. Her lips had cracked. She watched him scan the horizon, always alert, always distant. You've crossed this trail before? She asked, voice hoarse. He nodded. With my father. Long ago. When the soldiers burned our village, we walked this same way. Many did not make it. His words lingered in the air like ghosts. Eleanor swallowed. And now you bring me here. Tawa looked at her for a moment, long enough that she saw something behind his calm exterior. A shadow of doubt. I bring you where no one will follow, he said finally. But the land is cruel. It takes more than it gives. She met his gaze, stubborn. Then it will have to fight for me. For the first time in hours, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. You are brave, Eleanor Hayes. She looked down, brushing dirt from her skirt. I wasn't, not until you. As the afternoon burned away, clouds began to roll over the mountains, dark, heavy, and full of promise. A storm was coming. Tawa's sharp eyes tracked the sky. We find shelter. They hurried toward a cluster of red rocks shaped like broken towers. Between them lay a shallow cave, just wide enough for two. As thunder grumbled across the horizon, they crawled inside. Rain began to fall, not gentle, but fierce, slashing through the air like shattered glass. The scent of wet earth filled the cave. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Tawa struck a small fire using flint and dry bark from his pouch. Soon, warmth returned, and the flickering light painted their faces again. She turned toward him, studying his expression. You don't talk much, she said softly. He glanced at her. Words are like arrows. Best used when needed. She smiled faintly. And I use too many? A pause. Then he said, sometimes. But they sound like music. Eleanor's heart stuttered. The rain softened outside, falling steady and rhythmic. She looked at him, really looked. The firelight carved lines of strength and sorrow on his face. Do you ever miss it? She asked. Your people. Your home. He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. Every day. But the wind carries their voices. I hear them when I sleep. She nodded, her voice breaking. I wish I could hear mine again. Tawa reached into his pouch and pulled out a small leather cord. On it hung a pendant made of bone and turquoise. My father gave me this. It protects the heart. He held it out to her. She shook her head. I can't take that. You already carry my shadow, he said. This is lighter. Her hand trembled as she took it. Tawa, why are you doing this for me? He met her eyes, his voice low and full of something she couldn't name. Because when I look at you, I forget the war. The air between them thickened with silence and meaning. When night fell again, the storm passed, leaving the desert cool and washed clean. The stars stretched endless and sharp above the mouth of the cave. Eleanor lay beside the fire, clutching the pendant to her chest. Tawa sat near the entrance, bow across his knees, watching the land as if it were alive. Will they still come for us? She whispered. He didn't look back. Yes, men like them do not forgive what they cannot own. She turned her head toward him. Then we'll keep running until they can't find us. He said nothing, but a faint trace of something, hope, maybe flickered in his eyes. Outside. The wind howled softly through the rocks, whispering a promise neither of them could yet understand. The next morning, the world was a pale haze. The rain had carved dark veins into the red sand, and mist curled around the canyons like smoke. Eleanor woke to the sound of wind whispering through the cave entrance. Her hand instinctively went to the turquoise pendant hanging around her neck. It was warm from her skin, a fragile reminder that she wasn't alone. Tawa was already standing outside, his silhouette framed by the morning light. His long black hair whipped behind him, his bow resting against his back. He looked carved from the same stone as the desert itself, silent, enduring, unbreakable. You didn't sleep, Eleanor said softly as she stepped beside him. He didn't turn. The wind speaks of riders. Her heart skipped. So soon? They move fast, he replied. But they do not know this land. We still have time. She followed his gaze. The fire trail stretched out before them, an endless maze of canyons, each filled with secrets, bones, and echoes. Where will we go? She asked. There is a place beyond the salt ridge, Tawa said. Old Apache ground safe. Eleanor took a deep breath, the dry air cutting her throat. Then let's keep moving. By midday, the sky turned dark again, not with rain this time, but with dust. The wind grew fierce, clawing at the earth and their clothes. Tawa stopped, his expression grave. Sandstorm. Before Eleanor could speak, the wind hit like a living thing. Sand stung her face, filled her mouth and eyes. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar. Tawa grabbed her wrist, pulling her close. Stay with me, he shouted over the wind. They stumbled through the storm, blind and breathless, until Tawa found a narrow crevice between two cliffs. He pushed her inside first, then followed, his body shielding her from the biting sand. The wind howled outside, shaking the earth. Eleanor clung to his arm, trembling. Will it stop? Yes, he said, his voice calm though his chest heaved. Everything stops, even storms. She looked up at him, his face streaked with grit, his hair wild, his breath steady. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't in years, safety. The storm raged for hours. They sat pressed together, their world reduced to the space between heartbeats. When the wind finally began to fade, the silence felt unreal. Tawa stepped out first. The desert was unrecognizable, shrouded in a ghostly layer of dust. "We move now," he said quietly. "Tracks are gone. The storm hides us." They walked for hours, guided by the fading sun. But as the light dimmed, they came across something unexpected, smoke rising from a ravine below. Eleanor frowned. "Is that a camp?" Tawa crouched, eyes narrowing. "Too small for soldiers." "Maybe traders." "Or bandits," she murmured. He studied the smoke for a long time, then nodded. "Stay here." Before she could protest, he slipped down the ridge like a shadow. Eleanor waited, her hands twisting around the pendant. Minutes crawled by. Then voices. Male voices. And then a gunshot. "Tawa!" She cried, scrambling down the slope. When she reached the camp, chaos burned before her. 2 men lay dead near the fire, their rifles still smoking. Tawa stood over a third, a wiry man with a gray beard and eyes like ice. "Tawa, stop!" Eleanor ran to him, grabbing his arm. The man on the ground raised a trembling hand. "Please, I wasn't going to shoot." "I swear it." Tawa's voice was low, dangerous. "You fired first." The man's eyes flicked to Eleanor. "Lady, help me." "I didn't know he had someone with him." Eleanor looked between them. "Tawa, he's unarmed now." Tawa's chest rose and fell, fury warring with control. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife. "Go," he said coldly. "Before I change my mind." The man scrambled to his feet, limping into the darkness. Eleanor turned to Tawa. "You could have killed him." His eyes met hers, hard and haunted. "He killed my brother." She froze. "What?" Tawa looked away. "I knew his face. From years ago. Soldiers rode with him when they burned our camp. He laughed while they threw fire on the children's tents." Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to comfort him, but the pain in his eyes was too deep, too wild. He sat down near the fire, staring into the flames. "The desert brings back ghosts, even when you run." Eleanor knelt beside him, her hand brushing his. "Then we faced them together." He didn't move for a long time, then finally turned his hand to hold hers. His touch was strong, but his voice soft. "You should not have followed me into this life." She smiled weakly through her exhaustion. "You think I had a choice?" He almost smiled back. Almost. The wind outside whispered again, carrying with it the faint sound of distant horses. Tawa's head lifted. His expression hardened. "They've found us again," he said. Eleanor's heart sank. There would be no rest tonight. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the desert soaked and shining. Mist rolled across the canyons and the air smelled of wet sage. Tohono crouched beside Kaya, who lay wrapped in his blanket near the dying embers of their fire. Her face was pale but peaceful, her breathing shallow yet steady. He pressed a hand to her forehead. "Still warm," he murmured, his deep voice heavy with worry. Kaya stirred, her lips parting. "You didn't. Leave me this time." Her voice was faint but teasing, carrying the strength of a woman who'd seen the edge of death and come back. Tohono's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, only looked away toward the rising sun bleeding over the cliffs. "I thought you'd given up on me again," she whispered. His hand closed into a fist. "I tried," he said finally. "But every mile I rode away I still heard your voice. Like a ghost I couldn't bury." Kaya's eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "Then don't run anymore." Tohono hesitated, staring down at their joined hands. His rough, scarred fingers dwarfed hers. For years he'd lived between two worlds, one of blood and vengeance, the other of peace and impossible love. Now both had found him here, bleeding together in the middle of nowhere. A low rumble echoed through the canyon. Hooves. Tohono's eyes snapped toward the horizon. A cloud of dust rose in the distance. Riders. Cowboys, maybe bounty hunters. He stood instantly, reaching for his bow and quiver. "They're coming," he said, voice flat and certain. Kaya pushed herself up despite her weakness. "Then we ride. I'm not slowing you down." He turned to her sharply. "You can barely walk." "Then you'll carry me?" she said, defiance flaring in her tired eyes. For the first time, a small, crooked smile broke across Tohono's face. "Stubborn woman." He lifted her gently, setting her onto his horse, Raven. As he mounted behind her, his arms circled her waist, steady and protective. Together, they rode into the fog-covered canyon, the sun casting golden light over the rain-washed land. Behind them, gunfire cracked through the stillness. Bullets tore into the rocks as the riders closed in. Tohono urged the horse faster, weaving through narrow passages and dry streambeds. Kaya clung to him, feeling every muscle in his back move like coiled steel. They broke free onto open land, galloping across a field of tall grass glistening with dew. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, but Tohono knew they weren't safe yet. At the edge of the plain stood an abandoned Spanish mission, its stone walls half collapsed and covered in vines. He guided Raven inside the crumbling courtyard, stopping behind a fallen bell tower. "We rest here," he said, helping Kaya down. She leaned against him, exhausted. "What happens when they find us?" Tohono didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his face unreadable. "If they come, I'll make sure they don't leave." Kaya shook her head weakly. "No more fighting, Tohono. I can't lose you again." He brushed his fingers across her cheek, gentle despite the calluses. "You won't, not this time." As dusk settled, the world turned gold and purple. Inside the ruins, they shared silence broken only by the whisper of wind through the bell tower. Tohono sat beside her, sharpening an arrow, his thoughts distant. "You once said you didn't believe in forever," Kaya said softly. He looked up, his dark eyes glinting in the firelight. "I didn't, until I found you." Kaya smiled faintly. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "That if you have to walk away again, you'll take me with you." For a long time, he didn't speak. The flames danced between them, warm against the chill creeping in. Finally, he reached out and placed his hand over her heart. "You already walk with me," he said, "even when you're not there." Outside, thunder rolled far away, soft, fading. The storm was over, but something deeper had changed. The man who had once walked away now stayed, and the woman who once wept alone no longer cried. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring or if peace would ever find them. But for that night, in the ruins of stone and sorrow, Tohono and Kaya had each other, and that was enough. The night was still, but tension hummed through the ruins of the old Spanish mission. Tohono crouched beside Kaya, the firelight flickering across his muscular, scarred chest, his long black hair tangled from the ride. The wind whispered through the broken bell tower, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain from the day before. Somewhere beyond the canyon, hoofbeats echoed soldiers, bounty hunters, relentless and growing closer. Kaya's hands trembled as she clutched the turquoise pendant around her neck. "They're coming," she whispered, voice tight with fear. Tohono's dark eyes were sharp, unyielding. "Then we do what we must." He had spent days carrying her through the desert, protecting her from both the unforgiving land and those who hunted them. He had walked away once, leaving her alone in despair, but never again. That night, he promised himself he would not falter, even if it meant standing against the world itself. The first of the riders emerged from the canyon like shadows bleeding through the mist. Tohono motioned for Kaya to stay low behind a fallen bell tower. The men were armed, their rifles gleaming faintly in the starlight. Tohono's bow was strung, an arrow tipped with iron and his determination. His chest heaved as he waited for the right moment. Kaya's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and trust. "They think this is just a woman and a man," Tohono murmured. "But they don't know the desert teaches its lessons well." The first rifle cracked, a bullet kicking up dust near their feet. Tohono loosed an arrow. It flew true, striking a horse in the flank and sending its rider sprawling into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Kaya ducked instinctively, gripping the pendant tightly. "Tohono!" she shouted. He didn't answer. He moved like a shadow, arrows releasing one after another, each strike precise. He was a storm of muscle, rage, and skill, protecting the woman he had once left behind. The remaining riders faltered, uncertainty breaking their rhythm. Tohono pressed the advantage, using the terrain to his favor: narrow passages, jagged rocks, and the echoing ruins. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Kaya's heart pounded. She had watched Tohono fight before, but never like this, not for her life. She realized in that terrifying clarity that she loved him more fiercely than she had ever thought possible. Suddenly, a rider broke through the far wall of the ruins, gun raised. Kaya froze. Before she could react, Tohono leapt between her and the threat, his arm catching the rifle and twisting it aside. The man went down, groaning, and Tohono's eyes met Kaya's intense. Unflinching, "Stay close," he ordered. She nodded. Swallowing her fear, the battle raged until the first light of dawn painted the desert in gold and crimson. One by one, the soldiers and bounty hunters fell back, weary and defeated, unable to match the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Finally, silence settled over the mission. Dust drifted through the broken walls, the morning sun warming the cold stones. Tohono lowered his bow and wiped sweat and blood from his brow. His chest heaved, muscles taut from hours of fight, but his eyes, dark, deep, and unwavering, were fixed on Kaya. She stepped toward him, voice soft but steady. "It's over." Tohono let out a long breath, the tension leaving him in a slow exhale. "For now," he said, though the weight of what they had faced hung between them like smoke. Kaya reached for him, her fingers brushing his chest. "Tohono, why didn't you ever leave again?" He looked at her, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. "Because no matter where I went, you were the voice I couldn't silence. You were the shadow I couldn't outrun." Her tears fell freely now, but they were tears of relief, of love, of survival. "And I couldn't survive without you." He pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "Then we stayed together. From now on, no more walking away." The desert around them stretched endless, the mountains glowing under the morning sun. The ruins, once filled with echoes of danger, now felt like a sanctuary carved from chaos. They stood together, battered but unbroken. Two souls bound by survival, trust, and love. Kaya finally smiled, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that would never leave her side again. "We've made it," she whispered. Tohono nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "Yes, and we will keep making it, one sunrise at a time." The wind carried their laughter softly across the canyon, blending with the distant calls of hawks and the rustle of the desert. For the first time in months, the world felt whole. Tohono and Kaya mounted Reven together, riding out from the ruins side by side. Behind them lay the echoes of the past, the storm, and the hunters. Ahead, the desert spread endlessly, wild and untamed, but they faced it together, unafraid. In that moment, the Apache warrior and the woman who had cried by the river were no longer running. They were free, and the sun rose over Silver Creek, blazing gold across the desert, lighting their path toward a future neither could have imagined, but both would fight to live.